Hey everybody, this is Jonathan Wolf from Fire Studios, and I'm going to be showing you how to create a plugin for WordPress called Search by Category. Now, you can basically understand what this plugin is going to do based on a name. It's going to allow our visitors to search for content based on categories we assign for our post. So you can see it you can see the working final version here. And we'll just do a quick one. We'll go with my friend James that I did some articles for earlier. And we'll search for them in the category design, and we'll press the search button. And now only categories with the tag James and in the category design will show up, and you can see there's only 2 in the category design. So let's try this in another category. Let's go with coding. And you can see the results changed. Now there's only 1 article that has the tag James. So what we're going to be doing is, let me come back to the localhost, sorry. So let's take a quick look at our final code. And you can see we're going to be declaring several default values that we'll be using for forms and values. We'll be adding the options. We'll be creating a class, which means we're going to be using op. Now, op has its benefits, which means we don't have to declare a whole lot of global posts and global variables. But basically, it's just for us to help keep our code organized in a nice hierarchy design. And you can see as I scroll through that we're going to keep all this plugin, all the settings, all the options, all the return, all the results, all the parsing in one file. That way it can all just come down and we don't have to edit multiple files and start getting into requires and includes. We're just going to keep it real nice and simple. So that's what our final one is going to look like. Let's start building the plugin now. So let's go to our plugins folder of our WordPress install. Let's create a new folder. Let's title it Search by Category, and I'm going to add a -tutorial. It's mine. Now we'll come in and we'll create 2 new files. We'll name the first one Search by Category. Change our extension .php. And the next one we're going to title it SBC Style. And this is going to be a style sheet for our plugin. I'm just going to name that SBC Style.css. So let's go ahead and open up our Search by Category and go ahead and import our required comments that all plugins need to tell WordPress that we're actually going to be doing some code writing here. Name a plugin, search by category. Okay, now once we do that, we're just going to space down, give us a little bit of room, open up a new comment, and we're just going to set up some defaults here. First one is going to be a variable called focus. Next one we're going to declare is hide empty. Third one is going to be called excluded cats or excluded categories. Fourth one is going to be called search text. Fifth one is going to be exclude child or exclude children. Next one is going to be raw excluded cats or categories. And the last one is going to be SBC style. I will just tab all these out to make them look nicer. So let's just go ahead and start describing what all our variables are going to be used for straight from the get-go. So our focus variable is going to be this value right here. This is going to be what we're going to be calling focus, or the default select value for our drop down. It's going to be the catch-all. If they don't select a specific category, they just leave it as this. It's going to search in every category. So we're going to declare that as focus or first option in drop down. That way we know what we're working with. Next one, we're going to go with hide empty. We have an option here in our settings when we get to this part whether or not we're going to hide categories to no post. And if we are, then we're going to set this value to 1 or true. Now, if it's set to 0 or false, that means we're going to hide all categories that have no posts in them whatsoever. That way, they can't search in categories that don't have any posts to search for. That just seems stupid. So we're going to go ahead and cut that ability out for them so they don't make that mistake. So hide empty is a pretty obvious and ubiquitous term. So we're just going to leave that as is. And instead just give ourselves a title of 1 means true, 0 means false. And we're going to go ahead and back on our focus variable, just give it the default value of in all categories. Now our excluded cats variable, we're going to go ahead and just rename that to an array, because that's what we're going to be using it as later in the code. Now what this is this going to be a comma separated array of all the categories that we don't want to show up, and we're going to manually select these from here just like this. All of these ones I just checked will now be forced into a comma separated array that we'll use to remove the options from here. So comma separated array, or CSA as I'll be short coding it just to save space, of specific cats. Search text is going to be this default value right here in the search bar. Since we don't want it's just going to be that default text, and we're just going to go ahead and default it over to search for. Now our exclude child is going to be referenced as exclude children, just so you know. And this way, if we have child categories like I do for coding, I have the CSS, HTML and JavaScript and PHP categories as childs of coding, and we want to exclude those from this drop down list, as you can see here, then we can do that just by checking this this one right here, and that will tell it to hide those from the list. So let's go back to our file and just say no hierarchy. Our raw excluded cats. Now this is going to be another array but this one is not going to be added for anything other than for one specific function use. But we need to keep this so that when the user checks these boxes and presses Save Settings button, the function we're going to be using to create this checkbox dropdown needs actual post data to recreate the checks. So what we're going to do is store the raw post data and the settings and the new database field. That way we can just pull it out and have all these rechecked for when they come back. Now we're just going to name this as for admin checklist. That way we know what we're doing with it later on. And we're going to default value this as an array instead of just a normal default value. And for our excluded child, we're going to go ahead and name this 0 so that we can it's going to be functioning the same way as hide empty. 1 means true, 0 means false. So let's just copy that back down here. And then our last default variable we're setting up is called SBC style. Now this is going to be another 1 means true, 0 means false, but it's going to be telling us whether or not to use our custom style sheet that creates this look right here, or whether or not we're going to leave it up to the person using the plugin to style it themselves. So let's go ahead and paste in our 1 means true, 0 means false, but we are going to specify or name it as use our custom style sheet. And we're going to go ahead and default this to 1 or true. So now that we have our defaults there, we're going to need to add them to the database. And to do this, we're going to use the WordPress default function of which one did I put it under? Add option. Now, add option has 4 default params or arguments that we can add to it: name, value, depreciated, and autoload. How do I say this? We're only going to be using name and value, since the defaults for depreciated and autoload are what we want. So all we need to do is focus on name and value, and that's really all you're going to have to focus on for all your plugins. Only specific situations where you need to define these last 2. So let's go ahead and we're going to set up an add option for every one of our variables. So in effort to save time, we're just going to go over and I'm going to copy in the one I did earlier. And I'll describe what happened. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new field in the database table, WP options, and we're going to insert our value of the focus variable, which in this case was in all categories. And we're going to do this for each one, creating an SBC-hide empty. The reason all these start with an SBC dash and then whatever name is so that when we're going through the database, and we can tell which ones are from our plugin and which ones are from other plugins. And this way we have our own abbreviation. We don't run the risk of having ours overwritten by another plugin using the same title. And you can see here's all of our added in from my our real category, our final plugin that I put in earlier. So we got these in. We can now officially deactivate our final one, and we can turn on our tutorial one so far, and we can see ours get added into the database as is. So let me just go down here and turn this off. And here we go. This is our new one. I'm actually going to give it the plugin name of tutorial so that we don't get mixed up later on. So now our plugin is activated, and if we come back over here and refresh our database, we'll notice that all of our hide empty and all of our things have been reset to their default values. And if we delete these, they'll come resetting back in because of our code. Now, once we have this done, we need to go over and we can finally start coding our configuration page that I showed you earlier. So to do this, we're going to be using a class or PHP op. And to do this, we're going to start out with a simple if statement. We're going to say if class exists, and we're going to name ours SBC, or search by category, admin. If this class exists or doesn't exist, then we're going to create it. So class SBC admin, just space it out so that our code is more readable. And now we get to add in our first function of our code. And what this one is going to do is add that link that you see here and that you see in our settings tab right here. We're going to create both of those in one function. And what this is going to do is we're going to create a new function called add config page. Now we're going to create another if statement inside of this just to make sure we have our right version, called function exists. We're going to go with add submenu page. So if this function adds submenu page, which will, so if submenu page is present, if we can create these links, then we're going to start using them. So add submenu page, it has several default value: page title, menu title, access level / compatibility. Means if the user has a high enough administration level, if it's administrator, writer, contributor, all these things have a certain level applied to them, and whatever value we insert here is going to be the minimum requirement for the settings to go through, or for the page title to be there for them to mess with. File and function and icon URL. We're not going to be using this last one since we have no use for it, since we're all going to be putting one under the settings tab. We're going to be using every function up through here. So let's come back in here to our code and come back to our if statement, and we're going to add in, not add submenu page, but add options page. That way we can automatically insert it into the settings tab. So add options page. It's just going to be real easy for this part. Search by category options. Search by category. 10, which means admin. We only want the administrator to be able to edit this. And for our file, for that title, we're going to be using a function called base name. And what this is just base name. Where is it? File. and that's going to give us the file that we're currently using. And then our last setting is going to be array, our class, which is SBC admin, and then the second value is going to be the actual function we're going to be using to create the page, which we're going to be calling config page. Now let's see what's telling me is wrong here. Alright, give me a second. I gotta do some debug. Alright, it turns out I was just missing this last semicolon here. And now that we have the links existing, if we save the file, we can come back and see them show up. Scroll down to our plugin, search by category tutorial, and we click this, and it's not there because it will show up as soon as we add in our config page function. So let's just go ahead and create that, and then we'll test it from there. So now that we have our function open for our config page, we're going to do a few checks to make sure that we're either updating or just displaying, and that the people that are viewing the page actually have the correct permissions and have actually gone through the form in order to update the page, and are not trying to inject data to hack the site through this. So just a quick if is set, and just do a quick post submit. Whoops. And we're going to go ahead and say we're updating. And if not, we're going to be displaying some data, which means we're going to be displaying the tables and values that we're going to be going through in a little bit. So to start off with, when displaying our config page, we're just going to go ahead and see if I got this right before I continue. Yep, okay. Continue to do a quick check. Space that out right. We first need to open up a div with a class of wrap. Now what this is going to do is we just come over to anything, we'll go with breadcrumbs. Div class wrap is going to give us this whole sidebar area over here. So div class wrap, come down, close the div, tab in, and we'll just go h2 search by category options. Space out again, and we'll start up our form. Now our form is just going to be using no action and a method of post. We're also going to give it an ID just for styling and later use. That's FBC config. But we'll save this and we'll see if our plugin has shown up now. Okay, I need to do a little bit more bug wrapping. Oh, I remember why. Really terrible. Sorry about that, guys. I forgot one thing we need to add in for it to show up. Is we need to add in an action. Completely forgot about that. So, what an action is that it adds an extra feature or an extra item to the WordPress code. And what this one is we're just going to quickly title this insert into admin panel, just so we can go through and quickly recognize our code later. And the function is add action, and it's admin menu. That's the name of the action that we're going to be modifying or adding an extra element into. And then our last one is just going to be the array from before of SBC admin and a second value of add config page, and then we'll just semicolon that out. Now the reason we're doing these array and having to put two values here instead of the standard just having add config page is because we're doing a class and we're doing op. For this to work, for the op to work and our class to work, we have to have the SBC array and then the value option, so that WordPress will know to go first to our class and then to the function. So once that's added, it shows up. I'm really sorry I forgot about that. We'll refresh the page now, and we'll see that our search by category has shown up right here. And we came in, we see our titles now here, and it's all showing up the way it's supposed to. Now let's come back to our HTML and let's start setting up our form. And how we're going to do this is, to start out with, we're going to be using a WordPress function called WP once field. Now what an once field is, it's a hidden field that is filled with a random value that WordPress will know, or that will tell it to check up here as a second layer of security. And if this field value is not there, then we know that we're trying to either be hacked, or somebody's trying to go through the form in the wrong process, or the page is being loaded incorrectly. So what we now need to do is give it the value of SBC update settings. This way we can now check the in once based on this name of SBC update settings. Now inside of our form we're going to be using tables, so that because we're going to be using tabular data and a tabular style to display our data. So let's quickly set this up of table. We'll just give it a quick class of form table, close it off. And we're going to open up another table row, tab in, and a th scope of row, v-align top, and this is what we're going to be storing our label in. And our first form text is going to be our focused, or no, our search text. Yes, sorry. The default value of this form is going to be our first one we're going to allow the user to edit. So we're just going to give it a value of display text or no, yeah, display text in the search box. And let's add in a colon there. That way they know the next box is going to be pertaining to that. Come down and we'll add another TD. And this is going to hold our form value or our input. Now the reason I gave this a class of regular text is so that it will take some of the already WordPress themed classes and use them to help our form look better. If we come back to our breadcrumbs, we'll notice that they're kind of short and look like this. But if we go to our general, we'll notice that they're stretching all the way over here, and that's what we want. We want really dynamic and stand out titles there. That way the user knows and has space to input whatever they want. So the class is called regular text to achieve that effect. And then after that, we're just going to go put in a standard value, and this is where we're going to insert our form value of focus. Make sure I didn't miss anything there. Now we'll save it. We'll come back to our search by category screen, and we can see our boxes here, and it's stretched out like we want it, but it doesn't have our value. Now the reason this is that we have not brought in our values and our functions and our variables. Sorry, I forgot the words. Our variable into this class and into this function yet. And we're going to be doing that in just a second when we go through and update the form. But first off, we're just going to go ahead and lay out our entire table. And I'm just going to quickly copy and paste my table from the final code just to speed things up. Now, one thing I want to point out is that when we're doing checkboxes, we're going to go ahead and give it a value of 1 or true, because the way text box operate is that if a text box is checked, the value will apply. But if it's not checked, then no value will be passed at all. So we're just going to go ahead and apply another if statement through PHP that if our variable of hide empty for this one is equal to 1 or true, in our case, the way we're using it, then we're going to echo out the HTML to check the box automatically. And we did that for all of our checkboxes. And then the last thing I'm going to point out with the way we're setting up the config page is this function down here for our checklist of categories. Now, WordPress has several functions that are not available to you unless you're in the plugin environment. One of these happens to be WordPress category checklist, and you write that out as WP category checklist. Now the first two values of this function have to be 0, otherwise it won't work, and then the last one has to be a post data filled value that will recheck all of our boxes. That is why we have that raw excluded categories variable, and that's why we're stored in the database. That way we can re-pull it in later after they leave the page and their session data is deleted. So you can see the it can being used in one of them. I have them pulled up and I deleted that tab. So if we refresh our page, we can see that now all of our thing is in here. Now the reason I have this warning right here about our styling is that we're using several styles like border radius and a special style called KHTML later on, so that our form looks nice and all of our current browsers, but all of our old browsers have a very specific problem I'll point out when we get there. And I discovered this problem, and it's a very, very big issue, and I'm still looking for a way around it. So we can see that our category is now filled and that we're ready to start taking these values and inputting them into the DB and updating their default values. So first off, let's come back up here to our if statement. We're going to go ahead and we're already checking for our submit button, but now we're going to go ahead and just check for our end once. So our end once is equal to the request and that would be the default way of calling it in if we not given it a value here. But since we named it SBC style, we're going ahead and replacing that with SBC update settings. So we'll just go ahead and close that off. And then if that is available, we're going to create another if statement to check to make sure we got the right return values from this. If WP verify end once, I'm going to pull in that value of the end once that we just made, and then Now if these two don't match up, then we've got some stuff to work out. Let's come back over here and I'm going to show you the end once from our table. You can see right here it's got an ID of WP once. Knew I had that wrong. So no, we are not going to be calling it in by this. It's going to be called WP end once. I had that right in my head. What this is going to do is we're just going to kill it and say there is an error, security error. I'm just going to close that if off. So if our form hidden value does not match the one that WordPress already set up here and stored in its own session, then we're just going to kill it and say you did something wrong and you're not supposed to be there. I'm going to come down here, I'm going to create another if statement. I'm going to say if current user can. We're going to give it the value of manage options. If the user can manage the options or can't manage the option, we're going to kill it again. We're going to die and say you cannot edit these options. And that way we now have 3 levels of security protecting our future values and our future functions that are going to update the database. And we're going to help prevent some squill injection and some incorrect usage through these. Now that we've got all these security measures set up, we can start taking our form or field value and then we can go through. So let's add in one more thing that we need to add in is check admin referrer and SBC update settings. this is a quick little fourth method of security that we're using, and we're going to make sure the refer was from our form and was from the current page that we want them to view all the options from. This is just a real quick one, and we've already covered this twice already, but this is just another little quick added layer of security. So let's go ahead and make a new comment on our code, and we're going to say get our new option values. We got our new focus, our new hide empty, our new search text, our new excluded child, and our new SBC style. These are all the ones we're going to directly take the post data from. So is equal to focus, we're just going to correlate these to the IDs of our forms and inputs below. So now that we have this through, we're going to need to create another if statement to counteract another problem we have with the WP category checklist. Now this function has a nasty habit that if none of these are checked, then it will return a massive error and kill the script if we don't do anything about it. So we're going to create an if is set for it. And it already gives itself an ID of post category. That's an ID it self-assigns through WordPress. We're going to say our raw excluded cats is going to be equal to that post value. Now, once that's in set, we should be good to go. Let's quickly tab this out to mash this. But first off, before we save anything, let's go ahead and fix the values of our checkboxes. And how we're going to do this is we're going to another comment off our code and make sure checkboxes return correct values. Now this is just going to be a series of if statements. If empty, hide empty. If this value is empty because the checklist or the checkbox was unchecked, then we're going to go ahead and set hide empty to 0. And we have 3 variables using the same pattern. Hide empty excluded cats, or exclude child, sorry. And then our last one is SBC style that uses the same pattern. So now that we have those set, we can update the option table and the database. And how we're going to do this is using the update option function provided by WordPress. And what we're going to do is we're going to give it the same name that we gave the add option up here, and then we're going to do the same pattern and just apply our new focus or our new variable data that we want inserted. But what we're going to add on to this one that we didn't add on to our add options, just as another layer of security, because you can never have enough, is we're going to apply a MySQL real escape string. And what this is going to do is going to escape all the characters from this value, so that nobody can go through and have any squill injection going on that will affect the database or corrupt the database or do something to destroy or anything. We just want to make sure we got everything going on safe and secure. I'm going to do this for each one of these updates. And again, in effort to save time, I'm going to copy in mine from the final plugin. Now right now our plugin has gone through, taken our form values from down here and added them to the database. But for all of our values to show up in these boxes and in these check boxes, we're gonna have to recall in these variables and get them from the database. That way they're constantly updated and they're at the right form that we just inserted them in. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab another, we're going to reset all of these variables. So we got focus, tab over, is equal to get option SBC focus. What we did is we just took this value and got it directly from the database. We reached in and we pulled it right out of here. That way, whatever we just updated to is now this variable's value and will reflect in the form, and it's going to reflect later on when we do this same call when we're using these variables again later. So it's the same process for all these, and again, just to save time, and it's a tedious process. I'm going to copy it over, and there we go. We save this again, we come back and we refresh our page, and we should see all of our default value checked. And it did keep this one check mark that I left from the final version plugin. Now that we have all of our options and all our configurations working, we can finally start to build this form we see on the page. Now to do this, we're going to come outside of the class, and we're going to start creating a new function. Just clean that up a little bit, that way I can tell where I am. So now we have our main function. We're going to title this SBC, or search by category. We're going to keep it real simple. Now what we're going to do is, to start off with, is we're going to come up here and just copy some of this code. That way we don't have to retype it out. Because what this function is going to need is going to need these form values. It's going to need these variables to have values from the database. And now the only ones we need are focus, hide empty, excluded cats, search text, and excluded child. So we can delete raw excluded cats in SBC style since they're not needed for this function. Now, for this drop down that we see right here, we're going to be using a function called WP drop down categories. But with this function, we have a particular issue. So if I pull up the codec page, you'll see that there are several arguments that go by, and that one in particular is that we need to change. It is echo. By default, using this function will echo it out, but the way we're going to be using it inside of a EOH or a hypertext processor, I think is what it's called. I can't remember at the current point in time, but that's what we're going to be using it inside of. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and specify a variable for its settings, and we're going to call that settings. And we're going to assign this function to a variable we're going to call list. Now, to this list, we're going to apply our settings variable, which we just described as setting up. So settings equals array. And we have a whole array of values we can use to change to this plugin. Now, this shows up as show option all focus show option none nothing, and it goes on a long pattern like that. So in a quick time effort, we're gonna quickly just copy and paste this array. Delete that because we're not at that section yet. And you can see that we have several options we got to change. We got the show option all, which is going to be the value of the first select box, which is also going to be an in all categories option. We got show option none, which is going to be the value if there are no categories to select from. Now, we're not going to have a value there because if the user is setting up this plugin and selects every category to exclude, they don't need this plugin and they're not using it. So we're not going to have an option there, because if they're using it like that, they're using it wrong and they don't need the plugin. We're going to have order by, set the name, that way they show up in an alphabetical order and it's easy to read and easy to find where you want. And the order is going to be alphabetical like I just said. And we're going to go show last update no. We don't want to know when it was updated. Show count, it's going to be set to false too, because we don't want to know how many posts were in that category. Or you can change it from here, but we left this default because this is not an option we want to set up and we're trying to keep our database count low. Hide empty is going to be set to our variable. Child of, we're going to set that to no, because our child of setting is just, it gets the ancestry of the category and we don't need that. Exclude. Now this one we're going to take our excluded categories, which is just a comma separated array of values that we set up, but we're going to have to I'll get to that in a second. The way we have it now, the way forms give it to us, is not the way we're going to be using it. But we actually have to set this up special to begin with. So we have to have a comma around the variable, which is not usual practice like we can see here, just because that's the way WordPress parses this particular value and key. So we did that. We have echo set to no. We don't want our form to echo yet. We have selected set to no because we don't need that option. Selected just tells you which one you want to appear first by default. Say you want to have coding to always be the first option, and then have all categories be the second option, and then all the rest of them just go down from there. We don't want that option, and we're going to have hierarchical set to 1. That way when they click on it, they can see child categories spaced out here. And it's just an aesthetic thing, and it helps readers and viewers know which categories belong under main categories and can refine their search that way. We're going to give it a name of cat. Now, this name is very important for when we go to exclude the categories from the query that gives us our search result. So that must be set to cat. It must be set to cat. And then we just give it a class of post form. That way it just has a class for us to work with. And then depth, we have exclude child. That way if it's set to true, we want to exclude children. CSS, HTML, JavaScript, and PHP, all these child categories right here will not show up in the list. So now that we have these options set correctly, we can go ahead and create another quick variable because of our hypertext processor. I'm just going to call it blog URL. And this is just going to use the get blog info function. It's a very standard WordPress template tag that you use, and that way we can echo it out in a minute here. So we're going to create another variable called form, and this is going to be our hypertext processor. So EOH div ID SBC, and it's just echoing out the form. And to speed this up, I'm just going to quickly copy this. Now you can see here, to echo out our variable, we just use the brackets or the curly brackets to grab the variable and echo it out. And what all this on blur and on focus stuff is that if our default value, when we click on it, we're going to set the value of that field to nothing. And when they click away, if the value is still set to nothing, we're going to bring back the default value. Now this is just a user experience add-on. You don't need this, but to set it up, you simply use on blur. If this value is equal to nothing, then this value is equal to search text. And then on focus, if this value is equal to search text, then this value is equal to nothing. What on blur means is when we go away, when we're not looking at the form anymore. And what on focus means is when we click on it and we want to start typing, when we give it our focus and we want to start going. And then just to echo out our list, because it automatically produces all the HTML needed, we just did a list variable echo. Very simple. So now that our EOH is saved, we come back over, and our localhost, if we refresh, we'll see nothing. Why are we seeing nothing? Alright, I'm about to do some debug. Alright, turns out I forgot the last part of echoing that form variable. My bad again. So now if we come back, refresh the page, we should see, and yes we do, we see our form without the styling because we have our style. Let's see. If we have our style set to checked, yes we do. That's our next step. We need to add in our action to pull in our styling. So let's space down here and let's set up another if statement. It's going to be really rudimentary and simple. If SBC style is equal to 1, then we're going to create a new function, and it's kind of called style insert. Now to do this, we're going to set up a current path variable. And just because it's a long process, I'm going to scroll down here and just do it this way. What this does is it grabs the option site URL from the database, because it's automatically set there right here, and injects it, and we're going to add on /wp content /plugins and then base name and dir name of the current file, and that's going to give us the plugin folder name. And then we're going to add down here, we're going to echo it out, and we're going to go /sbc-style.css, and that's that style sheet we created earlier. Now the last bit we need to do is right below this function, and we need to add in another action. So let's go to add action WP head, and then our function title style insert, and that will inject our style sheet. Now right now our style sheet is completely empty, so let's open that up. And I'm going to open up the final version, if I can find, there it is. We're going to quickly copy and paste it and go through it bit by bit. So we're clearing both sides of the form, and then we're going to go and do everything inside our box. We're going to reset the margin up to 0 pixels inside of our form. And then our input, we have a background of F5, a border of solid B, 1 pixel. Our padding is going to be to 4 pixels on top, 4 pixels on bottom, and then 10 pixels left and right. Our width is 80%, and our margin bottom is going to be 10 pixels to spread it out. And that's going to give us the look of this. Let me refresh the page. That's going to give us this look right here. I'm trying to keep it very WordPress admin-esque. That way, when you go to the search box, it reminds you of the WordPress administration panel, and it just helps you understand and acknowledge the form more. It's a user experience thing. Now, here's where we start getting to our select box, and we started doing a whole lot of strange code to it, because by default all browsers have a special form styling that they use for select boxes, and you can, in most cases except for in modern browsers, you cannot override this default styling except for in a few certain ways, like width and height and padding. Those are basically all you have, maybe background color, maybe border color, depending on which browser, but those are really your only options. So a main problem is that with Safari you can't change anything but font size and background color, and that's it, unless you apply this statement right here, which is -khtml appearance none, and that will remove the default Safari styling. But what this also does is, see, it also removes the little down arrow right here that tells people this is a drop down. But if you still click on it, it still shows up. Now, to fix this, we can come back to our code, come back up here. We can make a slight addition. We're going to go at, whoops, ampersand at NBSP space NBSP space NBSP, and we're going to use a standard HTML UTF-8 character code to sort of create a fox arrow downward that tells people that this is a drop down. And the closest one that we have is called Nabla, N-A-B-L-A. So N-A-B-L-A. Now if we save this and we come back and we refresh, we should see the arrow. Yes. See, it's very similar to the drop down arrow that we have in other browsers like Firefox. And I'll show you a comparison right now. And I'll also show you an issue that this current situation we're using now, this current fix, has. We pull up the localhost, which is where we're working from. And you can see that you can still see the arrow a little bit right here. That's just a slight issue. And we can fix this by adding spaces and non-breaking spaces to help space it over and get it behind this arrow. Now that one extra space right there should line it up just right. Let's refresh both to make sure. And yep, it's hidden behind the arrow now in Firefox. But if we click on it, here's the arrow again. It's one of these things we're gonna have to deal with because there's no other options we have available to us right now. It's a common issue in every single browser because for some reason they felt the need to deprive us the right of styling drop down elements using the select and option tags. They decided that we did not need to be able to style those completely. So now that we have that fixed and we can see that this is still a drop down, we need to come back over and we need to fix our input from our excluded categories, because right now by default this checklist does not return a comma separated array. What just happened? Okay. Strange things sometimes happen in the new Safari. So by default this is going to return a form stylized or non-broken down array of values. What we need to do is cut this down to a comma separated array, and to do that we simply need to come back up and make a quick addition to our code. So we already have set right here that if it's set to exclude certain categories, we need to first off need to shift the array, because as soon as we do our what are the words I'm looking for? This excluded categories part right here will, for some strange reason, ignore the first value. So we're going to add an extra value to the start of our array. Since our raw excluded cats is already an array, we're going to come down here and we're going to create a new fix. So fix is going to be equal to I'm just going to copy this. The post category return. So now we're going to take that fix, which is an array by default because of the return, and going to array unshift. We're going to take our fix variable and we're going to unshift it by 1. We're going to add a 1 to the beginning of the array. Now this is not going to affect anything because 1 is never a category number. 1 is always used as a default or a fail-safe, scapegoat, black sheep, whatever you want to say for WordPress functions and WordPress strings like this to get it to the correct number it needs. It will just add a 1. So there's no harm in doing this. We would use 0, but 0 stands for all categories. So we'll set it to 1. That way we're not affecting anything. And then we'll come down here and we'll create a new variable called excluded cats. Tab it over. And this is going to be set to an implode based on the comma and the fix variable that we just declared. Now that's going to break apart the array into a comma separated array, which is what our excluded post down here needs to use to get the correct values for our form. Now we save this and we should see, or we won't see it anymore because I already put in the workaround that stops the error. But if there had been any sort of selection there, it would have failed. But since we don't, we're good. So now it's a comma separated array and we have that fixed, and it's erasing the first value and just straight up ignoring it. We're getting the correct return now. We've got everything working the way we need it to. We're going to start up our actual search process that's going to give us our correct search results. So right off our form, we're going to come down here, we're going to create a new function. I'm going to call return only selected category. Now we're going to do an if is set what in Jesus is okay, there we go. So if is set our SBC submit, which is the submit button of our form up here that they just clicked through. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to start processing our query and adding in some of our custom values. So first off, we're going to declare a global WP query. That way we have access to the database before the loop and before everything else, and we can tell it what to do. So we declare that global. We're going to create a new variable called desired cat or desired category. I'm going to set this to post cat, which is the title or class name. Name, sorry, of the drop down list that we said earlier. This cat is a very special part of the query because by default there are specific query vars in WordPress that it uses. And by using the term cat on this query vars and adding a dash before our comma separated array of before a comma separated array of categories, we can remove those from the category list completely. WordPress will just assume they don't exist. So we'll close up that variable, and then we'll set up another if statement, because if our desired cat is equal to the it's equal to star. I don't know the correct term for that. It's equal to star, which is the return value of the first thing, this in all categories. It returns a star, which means all. If it is set to all, then we're going to reset our desired cat. We're going to reset our desired cat to nothing. That way we're not removing any categories from the list that they want to be searched from. Why is it telling me that's an error? There we go. So once we reset that, we're going to create a new variable called excluded. And this is going to be based off of the get categories template tag. So we set to hide empty is false. That way, because get categories instantly by default sets hide empty to true, and will remove all categories that don't have any posts in them. We want to go ahead and reset that because we're already doing this in our settings table. So we don't want to double correct ourselves here. So we're going to have to set that to false, and then set up another one and go exclude, sorry, is going to be equal to our desired cat. So right now our excluded variable is going to be a list of every variable except for the one that the user selected in the drop down. This is the key point here. Now we're going to create a new variable called WP query, and we're going to go through and rename our query vars. And our specific one we're aiming for is cat, or categories. Now we're going to add a negative in front of the excluded variables. I'm just going to add excluded onto that declaration. And now that is over. We save the file, and our last bit that we need to do is add in our last function, or last filter, sorry. So we're going to call this hijack the search, and it's called add filter pre get post, and we're going to give this the value of return only selected category. Now what the add filter does is it's going to take right before WordPress goes through and try to grabs all the posts for the loop, we're going to inject our new function that tells it to not do that and to get rid of all the categories we don't need. And so that is the end of our plugin, and that should leave it officially working. We'll save that, we'll refresh, and we'll do a quick check to make sure. So let's search for James in the category internet. And we'll see that our first value is going to be from FS Air, making the jump to freelancing, then FS Air roundup. So let's do that same query in all categories as a comparison. And we'll see that the first one is still the same because that must be a common return value. They must be the same equal amount. But we'll notice that the second value has changed to remove the human element because the tag James was there and it was earlier posted. So there we go, that's all set up, and now you have your fully working search by category plugin.